Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Josh and Denny show, the what we call the Dumb and Dumber of Buddha Buddha Dharma. Anyway, just a joke. So every month we get together, and we seem to get better and better at it, huh, Josh?
Well, that's the plan, right? Yes.
So anyway, we have a division of labor here in the sense that Josh, writes down questions, viewpoints that are controversial, and then we try to discuss them.
For
So
this show anyway. Or this this
yes,
this one anyway, right?
yes,
So,
yes, 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 yes. That's true. So what is that one thing that you think out of all the things that you show me that you thought would be a possibility for discussion? What is that one thing that you think would be kind of most controversial?
well, I probably don't want to start with that one. Don't want to set fire immediately. But the stuff that we kind of um, some of the stuff we talked about. Well, we can also continue from the last time about Hīnayāna. And for
Yeah.
me, being a Westerner, we can do a quick recap what we said last time and then go further into that if you'd like. For me, it just didn't, well, a small vehicle didn't necessarily mean that was like a derogatory term. But then when you say it's like a lesser or an inferior, and maybe, then, but I mean, if we're going to be inclusive and diversified, even that is okay too, because every well, I don't need yeah. It's weird because it's like I know Denny wants defend and stuff. It's just I don't know what to say, but I'm going to let Denny take the reins here because he's more well spoken and knowledgeable about this than I.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me, this is like a plate of spaghetti. You got to get to the one end of the spaghetti, and you just pull it, and then the rest will just like become one strand. So I think, first of all, I think there are a lot that we can talk about, some of which we kind of continue from last time. But as we talk about, I think that one strand of spaghetti is what I would call localization. That is why are there so many different strands of Buddhism, and why is there so much discussions, some of them constructive and some of them not so constructive among them? And then ultimately, what is the future of Buddhism in the Western world, in particular in America? And so I think that one thing that kind of connects everything is localization. In other words, there's Buddhism, and then there's sort of localized Buddhism. In other words, Buddha, we all know who Buddha is, and we hope that when we say Buddhism is the teaching of Buddha. But then when that teaching goes to a particular, get immersed into a particular culture, it becomes something else. Or and then the people who are of that community, when they look out, they think that is Buddhism, and then when they see some other strands, and it causes discomfort. And so ultimately, probably not in this show because we just don't have enough time, but ultimately we're going to talk about the future of Buddhism in America. In other words, what should it be? How would it become? And so the question is that, well, it would only be something that is it has to have its own life. It has to be something that belongs to our culture, as opposed to something that belongs to someone else's culture, and then we sort of inherit their sort of historical development, right? And so ultimately, we're going to be talking about the future of Buddhism in America, and talk about why is it that it's important for Buddhism to localize. Because once we kind of get hold of that, then the whole discussions about Theravada versus Mahayana, the Tibetan versus the Chinese, the Japanese versus the Thai, these are all localized issue,
Great point. Yeah,
right?
that's one benefit of America for sure is like the melting pot. There's not a lot of ancient entrenched culture here that's has to defend itself so much. So it's a really interesting, I guess, like laboratory almost.
Absolutely, absolutely,
For
yeah.
me, I have the challenging part is bringing it to these teachings to kind of like social settings and groups and culture and stuff, where, being more of an individual, which that kind of thing fits into the West too, for good and bad. That, just focusing on I guess that's why I was drawn originally to the original Buddhist teachings, because just to exemplify the behavior and conduct and just profound truth and wisdom, and just, the perfectly developed human being, in all the teachings. But then again, that's just and then exactly, he wasn't even, it was beyond human or something other than human as well. But, and then all the stuff he went through just individually. So it's kind of like rectifying that kind of individual or maybe personal path, with then how bringing that to a larger scale of people who aren't that dedicated in the practice, but still see value and want to be involved. So that's definitely something to explore, and that's would be a great topic for the future.
Yeah. I think kind of putting the punchline, first, which is that one of the most profound aspect of Buddhist teaching, and one of the most disturbing, is that there is no one path. There's only one goal, but there's no one path. So everybody is entitled to their own path. And so what's central to Buddhist teaching, I believe that it's something like this. I forgot what is this or this, where it stands for a word, a Pali or a Sanskrit word called, I believe it's called episical?
Ahipasiko.
Ahipasiko.
Yeah, that's how I've heard it pronounced.
Ahipasiko. And growing up in Asia, growing up in small town Macau, and later on in Hong Kong, we have a lot of street vendors. So back then we don't really have like big supermarket. You go to the market, and you have all these what we call hawkers, and they're just like they're selling fruits and underwears and whatnot. And one of the thing that they would say is they yell at the top of the throat, and basically it's like, come look, come choose, and come pick what you like, and that's ihepasiko. That's what one time I believe there was a sutta, and I think you mentioned it, where people were asking Buddha, the historical Buddha, these really deep questions about his teaching versus other people's teaching and all that, and he just kind of put up his hand, and he says, ihepasiko, which means come and see.
And I think go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The other qualities of the Dharma that just reminds me is, I don't think I'm getting all of them, but the one is it's immediate here and now, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to wait. You don't have to wait to get the benefits from an afterlife from it, and it's verifiable here, and it's verifiable by the wise. The wise can back it up. There's a few other things that I'm blanking on now, but there's a list of what makes its teaching.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think ihepasiko is really in a different way, is that it really reflects the discipline of modern science. In that, when you study science, whether you study biology or chemistry or even engineering, you have to start with some assumption. Right? There is something that you have to accept, and so you can't just like start from a clean sheet of paper and hoping that you get somewhere. So, as a Buddhism student, you have to have some assumption, and you have to accept that there's certain truth to the assumption, but at the same time you have to accept that it's not the whole truth, right?
Well, and there's no belief required either. You're not asked to believe something. You have to check.
Well, you have to believe. You don't have to believe the entirety. But you have to start somewhere. You cannot just come in and says, "I don't believe in nothing," and then hoping that you get somewhere, right?
Now, see, this is a really good point to bring up, because when I heard about this one teaching that instead of getting enmeshed in belief or disbelief, because a lot of times that will turn people off, because it takes so much energy to hold on to a belief or defend a belief, in the same way with a disbelief. So the alternative to this that I find is wiser is treating everything as just information. Okay, it's like light as a feather. So if some other information comes along to discredit that, then you can let go of the information we already have.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then if something comes along to add to that, we can just take another feather and add that
Yes,
on there.
yes. Yeah.
So
No. I
information,
think that's an
it,
excellent point, and this comes back to the distinction between data versus fact.
yes,
They're a little bit different. One might think that they're the same, but before we get there, and so the idea of Buddhist teaching is that you have to start somewhere, and you have to accept some data, some historical data, right? You have to accept that, and then because it's just like science. Science has to accept you. If you want to, Einstein has to accept Newton first before he
starting
disapproved
point, a reference
as a starting
point,
point,
yes.
as a reference point. If I don't accept, basic particle dynamics, I'm never going to go, to the next step of studying something else, right? You have to
Well,
accept that.
even if you're trying to disprove it too, you have to have that as a reference point. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to have an anchor, and so that's in Buddhist teaching the same, but then you don't stop there. This organized religion, to me, has the problem that you believe and then you stop. That's it, all right? And so if we accept that kind of practice, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Well, because we don't accept that. We accept the idea that you got to start somewhere. That's what we call assumption. Then the question is that, okay, now I got to explore. Okay, now give me a chance to explore, and then now give me a chance. Once I explore and understand, then I have to come up with my own enhancement. Right? I got to say, this is the work. It works at 90% of the time, but there's some inconsistency in there. And rather than arguing about it, let me explore. Right? And Buddhism has this great capacity to allow you to explore. And then ultimately you have to verify. You have to come back and say, hey, I got there. This is what I got. It's not to say that what I start with was wrong. It's just that it was incomplete, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's about admitting our faults too. Most people don't want to do that. And most people don't like questions either. If you start questioning different religions.
Well, the problem is if you don't make the
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
You cannot equate questions with questioning.
Yes, that's a very good distinction. Thank you. Yes.
Right. And so, anyway, so we want to talk about Buddhism in America. We want to talk about the what we believe would be happening would be that Buddhism has had over half a century of history in America. But for the most part, what we have seen even today, most of what we see is what I would call immigrant Buddhism. They were brought here by the immigrants. And just like any other religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam, is that they were brought here by immigrants. This is their belief system before they came to the country. They brought it here, right? And it has, in the initial part, it has tremendous vitality, because it's serving a well-defined population of consumers. But the question is that we still have to go beyond that. It's like hamburger coming from Germany, I don't know. Then it became something else. Fish and chip came from another country and it became something else, right?
Well, there's the pizza effect, the interjection real quick, a pizza effect where it supposedly came from Italy, it got modified here, and then it goes back to Italy with the American changes, so it even changes the origination point of it. So.
French cuisine.
Yeah, well, yoga
French
too.
cuisine.
Yoga.
Yeah, French cuisine is completely what we would call California cuisine. Has completely changed the French.
Yes.
You can go on and on. So I want to make the distinction. I want to understand. What I want to do is all our discussion has to be based on data. Right? We have to be able to say, hey, this is historical data. Okay. And if
that's
you don't accept
thing.
it, yeah.
Well, it's actually more challenging than it seems, because a lot of times they say history was written by the victors. So a lot of times we don't get to hear the historical viewpoint, especially in such a warring world. We don't really get to hear the viewpoint so much of the people who were defeated in war, in battles and whatnot. Their version of history wasn't really allowed. I mean, it was destroyed a lot of times. That's
you don't have to look that far, right?
Right.
You don't have to look that far.
What we have to go by,
you really don't have to look that far. There's so much to be learned about the culture and the history of the Native Americans, and so much to be learned,
yes.
from the slaves. That's, you don't have to look that far, right? So I think hopefully we can agree on some set of historical data, and then understanding that we accept each other's fact.
Well, even if we don't accept it, we have to reference it to be able
Yeah,
to study it and
yeah,
to analyze it, dissect it, add
yeah,
to it, draw wisdom from it. That's the big
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
because
yeah,
if we don't learn from the past and we don't incorporate the knowledge into living, breathing actionable wisdom, then it's
yeah,
just book knowledge for
yeah.
not much reason. So.
Yeah. So if you were someone like Josh and I, who lives in America, and we're interested in Buddhist teaching, and we see this, I mean, as a consumer, we're completely sensory overload, right?
Yes.
And what it is because we have different traits of Buddhism coming in this country because we have so many different immigrants. So the most obvious one, the most popular one, perhaps right now, from my perspective, would be something like Vipassana, which comes from countries like Sri Lanka and Myanmar and Thailand, right? And so we understood that Vipassana is probably the most common practice in especially in the coast, the two coasts, and so we understand Theravada. So we call that the Theravada Buddhism. And of course, I would think in terms of visibility, the second most popular would be the Zen Buddhism.
Yes.
The
But
Zen Buddhism.
beyond that, real quick, and pause you,
Yeah.
is mindfulness. It's become like a phenomenon. It's not really associated with the thing that's in popular culture that's called mindfulness. Really isn't has much association with Buddhism. Some of it does, but you've got this stereotypical, very attractive blonde woman in the lotus posture, with mudras on her hands and looking just serene and peaceful and blissed out. And that can definitely be the case, but that's not the entire picture. And then some people even call it Mick mindfulness, like McDonald's, and it's become a million-dollar, billion-dollar industry.
Oh yeah, yeah. You have all these
Yes,
apps. You
yes.
have all these apps
Uh-huh.
that
And
are really,
space. Well, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Don't
So
want to
let's
name
save
names.
that. Let's save that for another day. Which
Sure.
is
Yeah.
which is can you really study Buddhism by focusing mainly what I would call materialistic perspective. We'll save it for another day. We'll save it
Sure.
another day, which is the
Sure.
difficulty. I remember writing an article when I talk about Master Zero, as like the membrane in a osmosis system, and he's right in the middle. You have the kind of Western approach of studying Buddhism, and you have the Eastern approach of studying Buddhism. Neither one of them is ideal, and he's like sitting in the middle, and he's trying to bring them together. We'll save it for another day. So let's continue and say the reason why it's important to talk about history is because when you think about all these different ways that people have been studying Buddhism in the United States, starting with Vipassana, and then mindfulness, which in some way they're closer to each other, both of which more or less come from the Southeast Asia, right? Because Vipassana, the mindfulness is really what we call Satipatthana, which is the mindfulness of the four foundations of mindfulness. We'll come back and talk about that. So at least we kind of put a hand around something that we call Theravada practice, which are mainly, and you can tell from the uniform that it's easy to tell that they have a particular kind of uniform, which are the monastics who practice in Sri Lanka and Myanmar and Thailand and all that. Interestingly, they don't in Vietnam. Vietnam is that one country that doesn't actually practice the Theravada. However, So that's one, and the other one, of course, and then we talk about the Japanese Zen Buddhism, and then how did that get involved? How did that get
Yeah.
developed? Yeah, that would
There's
be
some
very
in
interesting.
Laos and Cambodia too, right? Some
Yes.
Theravada in Laos and
Oh,
Cambodia. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Laos and Cambodia. Okay, so
I
the
don't hear much
countries.
about them though. That's I don't hear much about Laos and
Well,
Cambodia.
they also they're less developed. They're not as tourist friendly. So less people go there, and they're a much smaller country. Actually,
Okay.
in terms of percentage, the highest percentage of Buddhists, per capita is actually Laos. It's
Oh,
almost 90%. Whereas
wow.
in Thai, it's not
Even
as high as you think. Yeah.
even Bhutan,
Bhutan might
but
be
that's
quite
not
high. Yeah.
Theravada though. Yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, right. Bhutan is not Theravada. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we talk about the Zen Buddhism in
Yeah.
Japan. Now then we have kind of a very close cousin to that, which is the Sun meditation in Korea.
Huh.
Okay. Okay. So we got that, and then probably in terms of visibility to a typical American Buddhist student would be the Tibetan Buddhism.
Yes.
And
In the
then finally,
Mahayana stuff. Yeah.
just our, population wise, then the most common one which would be called the Mahayana Buddhism. Okay. The problem is that they're not polar opposite. The name is confusing because they're not polar opposite to each other. So, for example, Mahayana, Maha means the great or the large, the big. Yana means the vehicle, and so people say, "Oh, Mahayana, that's a big vehicle." But when we say Mahayana, what we really meant is Chinese. That's what we meant is the Chinese Buddhism, right? Whereas we say the Tibetan Buddhism, is very obvious that we're focusing on a geography, but in reality, the Tibetan Buddhism is part of Mahayana. Okay. The problem is that when we then go to the south and we say that's Theravada, that's not the opposite of Mahayana. Theravada just means elders,
Yes.
those who are very well developed in the learning. Then when we talk about Vipassana, which is different translations, and the one I like is just contemplation, is to look inward to get insightful into your mind, right? And so then people get confused with the name Vipassana as it represents a way of learning versus Vipassana as a concept. So then the
Yes.
question is that, Vipassana, that's only in Vipassana meditation, because outside of that, you can't talk about Vipassana, right? Which is wrong, because
Right.
everything is Vipassana. In fact, one would argue that the only unique contribution from the historical Buddha was Vipassana. So all the other sects, all the other approach is just another way of achieving Vipassana, which is the other side of the coin of Samatha. Well, now we're getting, okay.
That's okay. Yeah, we can get that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Keep
Okay. So
going.
so I'm just saying, I'm just pleading with our audience, the complexity,
Yes.
what we're talking about. So
Yes.
that's why, yeah. Mhm.
That's a great
So
point.
when you get to mindfulness, you say, okay, we study mindfulness. So this has nothing to do with Zen Buddhism. No. Mindfulness is as basic to Buddhism as anything else. Okay. So
And then
so
further muddy the waters with consciousness, the word consciousness and awareness,
consciousness, awareness,
and its
people.
relation to mind.
Yeah. Now then again, when you go to Zen Buddhism, where does the word Zen? Zen comes from the word Chan in Chinese, which actually was an abbreviation of Chana.
The absorption
Back in the old
states.
days, it's called Chana, and then that comes from the Sanskrit word called jhana, and the meaning of jhana just means sentimentation.
Now, yeah, that's the thing because I've heard definitions of like samatha. Samatha, is leads to cultivation of samadhi, which is another thing that because it's really hard to talk about samadhi. But then you talk, yeah, the settling. I've also heard it like, well, for Samatha practice, like a one-pointedness, a unification of mind, a gathering of mind, a coming
So
together
the
and folk.
yeah.
But then,
So the
and then
important
also the
yeah.
jhanas, this like 8 jhanas are absorption states, according to some. So that means
Yeah.
there's no meditator, no meditative object. It's just total absorption into the object, and then they
Yeah.
lead to these different absorption states, right? But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, there's so much here, so I want to
Yeah,
get your
but
perspective on
the
this,
point
and
I'm
then
trying to make
really
is
circle
that
back real quick.
yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that these none of them are unique to the practice. None of them are unique to the practice. So you can't just take a Madonna hamburger and says double patty as if they own that concept. Other people could have double patty. Okay.
Yes.
So you have to brand it differently. The unfortunate thing is that the way that Buddhism are brand now is that they're brand according to a concept that is actually uniform and universal. And so then typically we think that vipassana, that has to do with vipassana. That the way as you practice vipassana is the only way that you practice vipassana. The way that you practice mindfulness, well, if you go somewhere else, then Anyway, so there's a problem with that. There's another problem is that then we go to the level when we start to talk about Theravada, Mahayana, Tibetan, and Japanese and Buddhism. We have to understand that what makes them unique, what makes each and one of them unique and distinct, has to do with the culture.
Yes.
Right? And has nothing to do with the superiority of the technique. It's just a cultural thing. So within that little circle, what we call the what do you say, that the storm in the teapot?
There you go. Or the eye of the hurricane. No.
The storm? No, I'm talking about the storm of the teapot.
Okay.
With the
I
little
don't know.
teapot where people. It is the argument is between Theravada and Mahayana, and this is sort of a one-way argument, because those people who practice Theravada, they don't understand what the argument is all about, because that's they just practice. Okay, this is what they do, and it's the people who practice Mahayana. When they look at Theravada, they actually give it a different name. Historically, they gave it a different name called Hīnayāna. Hīnayāna, right? Again, going back to the hamburger, it's like, you and I eat meat, if we do, and all of a sudden these people are trying to make vegetarian burger, and they're having all these discussions, and then we say, what? Look, just leave me alone, okay? I don't need to know all this. But the problem is that those guys who want to push vegetarian burgers, they start to make all these distinctions. And in the same way, the people who practice the quote-unquote Theravada Buddhism, they're they're completely happy with what they're doing. They don't name names. They don't use, for them is not necessary. Whereas the problem we see now is that a lot of people who practice a Mahayana, actually what I would call the Chinese Buddhism, they look at everybody else and they say, we call those Hīnayāna, small vehicle, right?
Now, what do you mean by names? All these names. Can you give some examples?
Well, in Chinese, if you meet, actually Master doesn't do that. I notice that he does it a little bit, but just because that's what people understand.
Okay.
So when he talks about, because he himself practiced both.
Yes. Yep.
He himself practiced both. He practiced the Theravada technique, which
in the evening, in the night, right?
He practiced the technique because that's you can associate that with arahant, which is really, the idea is that you're seeking liberation or emancipation of your own. You're trying to relieve yourself of your own suffering, relieve yourself of the hindrances. Okay, so that's what Theravada teaching is all about. Okay, so we call that the arahant path, whereas the Mahayana, the Chinese Buddhism, they focus on what we call the Bodhisattva approach. and where you're supposed to focus on helping others to be liberated and be emancipated, right?
And I
And
love
so,
Shifu's approach because, the importance of that is how can we best help other people if we're not have the highest degree of liberation possible that we can have. You know what I mean?
well,
Because
exactly.
we're trying to help people from a lower standpoint, conscious,
Yeah.
which
So
can still be effective, but
yeah.
not as effective as if we're, completely as liberated as we can be.
Well, and that explains why the argument is a one-way argument, because those who practice the Theravada Buddhism, they understand what they're doing. They understand that they see themselves as the lifeguard in a big swimming pool, and it's very important for them to perfect their own skills. If they don't know how to swim, chances are they're not going to be a good lifesaver.
Yes.
And so they're very much focused on that. But in their scripture, they talk about going from an arahant to a bodhisattva. So the teaching of the quote unquote Mahayana is actually embedded in the Theravada teaching, but they see that as a logical and beneficial progression. Let's learn how to swim, then we go and teach someone else. Whereas a lot of people have these misconceptions over the Mahayana side that says that, well, no, actually what you want to do is to be a bodhisattva. And they ignore the part that, actually, if you don't know how to swim, you're not going to be a good lifesaver. They ignore that part, right? Which is very sad. And that's a big part of what Master is trying to do, is trying to break down this wall and say, like anything else, you gotta start here. And then, in fact, one of the
Great
discussions,
metaphor, Denny. Yes.
yeah, one of the discussion I have when the last time I was with the prison Dharma group was that they were talking about the four vow, one of which was save all being. Remember that? The translation, save all being. And I said, actually, most of the Japanese teaching are translations of Chinese. Okay, so they take the Chinese word and they translate in Japanese. And then when it comes to America, it's translated from Japanese, but more than half of which are Chinese anyway. So in fact, we are translating it directly from Chinese. Okay, and so the Chinese language is a very difficult language to translate, especially if you're trying to translate word by word, because the Chinese single characters have no unique meaning. It's how you conjugate it.
In relation and context, right?
Yeah, it's how you conjugate it with another word that you give it a little bit more precision. And so I said, the word save doesn't mean save. It means to guide.
I love that so much better than save. I mean, we don't have to be a messiah figure,
Yeah, we are here to guide others. In fact,
Yes.
we can't guide unless we ask.
And
Okay.
how can we even save anybody? That would just step on their journey and not give them the chance to learn what they need to learn from whatever's happening in their experience.
Correct.
So that's a very
So coming back, so if again, we're getting away from the details of discussions.
Yeah, I don't think literally. Yes, it's a spiral.
but I think the reason so coming back to your question is that how is that argument? Well, it's not. It's to me, it's not so much an argument as it is in ignorance. Okay, as in ignorance. So I've been called Orientals. I don't reject that. Some people, a long time ago when I first came to the United States, they said, "Oh, you're Oriental," and I have to say, "Well, what does that mean?" Because I don't understand that word. And so in order to really understand the word Oriental, I have to kind of put it in context of Occidental.
Yes, I was just getting ready to say that. Yep.
And I don't call you Occidental. Why should you call me Oriental? Because by calling me Oriental, you're being ignorant. You're ignorant of my culture.
But see, that's the thing, it's weird how that stuff gets going. That's why I don't really, I mean, people could call me honky or cracker or whatever they want. I really don't care what they call me. I just like to respect, just have to know what people would like to be referred to as called so I can do
Yes,
that.
because
Because a
it
lot of times,
opens up
some
doors.
people will say something and they
Yeah,
don't mean it derogatorily.
right.
It's somehow it's just got installed in the culture and they don't really
It's
even
their
know
way
what
of
it means.
shutting. It's
Yeah.
just like for them to shut, like just shut down their mind. They're just like so. What
Oh
I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah,
is
mind
that
control.
the Chinese Buddhists who practice what they call Mahayana practice, who then call everybody else, especially those in Southeast China who practice what we now call the Theravada, they're no different than a white person calling me Oriental. In that it's really their choice of shutting themselves off of really understanding what other people do. So what they do is that this is it. Mahayana is the great vehicle. How great is that? So it's complete, and this is all we need to know. And everybody else is we call them Hīnayāna, small vehicle. Now before I explain, now by the way, we don't use that anymore because in 1950 there was actually a World Congress of all the Buddhists. Now remember, in 1950, the Chinese were well, they are still today, but they were under the control of the communists, and so there were basically no participation from the Chinese Buddhists. In fact, Chinese Buddha didn't even exist anymore. They were completely destroyed for a long time.
Real quick
Anyway,
comment. That's it's fear of the unknown is
it's a
what
fear
that
of the
is.
unknown. Yeah,
A
it's a
fear of
fear
the
of the
unknown. So
unknown.
it protects them from fear of the unknown.
It's
Please continue. Yep.
identity. It's we call this identity politics.
Yes. Yeah.
It's identity. It's really not about you. It's about them. It's really for them to point a finger at you. Four of them are pointing. Three of them are pointing to
Exactly.
themselves.
It's
That's really
because
what it is.
they're afraid of what they don't know and
Yeah.
understand.
So
And
in
so that's
1950, there was a World Congress where all the Buddhists from all the sects got together and they said, no, from today on, we're not going to use the word Hīnayāna because it's a insult. It's an insult. And from now on, we're going to say Theravada because that's a word. That's a Pali word that means elders. Okay, and there's
so
a
this is
reason for
great
that.
context because
Yeah,
just the word in itself, a definition to a Westerner, doesn't really mean much. But when it's
yeah,
embedded into a culture and the intent of
yeah,
how they say it and view it, then it
yeah,
makes sense that it would be kind of derogatory. So I see
yeah.
that.
So again, so for me, when I see a Chinese Buddhist monk or nun that refer to the Theravada teaching as Hīnayāna, the small vehicle, that says something about that person, not about that. That
Exactly.
says that
Very good
person that
point.
is really, he doesn't have the world view. He probably doesn't have the modern understanding of Buddhism. Chances are, that he's not a good teacher for me. That's my point. Okay, so before I get into Theravada and how is that distinct from now let me just use the two words, which is Chinese Buddhism and sort of the Southeast Asia Buddhism, the Theravada versus the Mahayana. So when I use those words, just say those are the two distinctions. But the yana, the
And then
whole
we got to throw
idea.
in, or we don't have to, but there's Vajrayana, which is, it's not quite as popular, and that's what. Now, is there a distinction between
For them
Tibetan
is
and
they're
Vajrayana?
they
And then there's
consider
also
themselves, yeah,
Tantric Buddhism too.
yeah,
Kind of
yeah, yeah.
esoteric
But
stuff. But
that's
let's
another.
simplify. Yeah.
No, but they don't have any problem. The Tibetans don't have any problem with you calling them Mahayana. They
Yes, because
believe
it's
in
kind
that.
of under that
Yeah,
umbrella,
in
right?
fact, in fact, that's not a problem. It's just that within that, they want to distinguish themselves from the Chinese Buddhism. Then
I see.
they go into detail. So the reason for the word yana actually came from the Lotus Sutra, and so there was a section in there that talks about, and it's a story. It's just a analogy, and the story is that there's this old man who's the head of the clan, and he has these huge complex, and in there, lives his descendants. Okay, and they're having so much fun inside, but the house is on fire. So he's like jumping up and down, trying to get them to come out. He says, "Look, the house is on fire. Let's get out. Let's get out." And you know, all his clan people are saying, "No, what for? We're having fun here. This is great. We don't want to get out." And so the story was that he then brought 3 vehicles. He brought 3 vehicles. There's a small vehicle pulled by deer. There is a middle vehicle pulled by horse, and then there's a large vehicle pulled by oxen. And then he put in there, you know, all kinds of treasures. And then he trying to entice them to come out. And eventually, you know, they come out, and then you know, he shipped them off out of danger. And the reason for that analogy is that in the Lotus Sutra, the burning house is our universe. And we're suffering in the universe, and it's time to get out. And so you have to have different vehicle, and what we call the small vehicle is in some way is the Theravada teaching, where you're focusing on your own salvation, your own liberation, your own emancipation. Then you get to another vehicle, the Bodhisattva, and so forth and so on. And so that's where it came from. That's where it came from. The problem, again, is that what we call the small vehicle, which should really be called Theravada, they encompasses all 3 vehicles, but they do it in a more logical, you know, progressive way. It's like going to college. It's like, you know, starting from the elementary school, graduate, then go somewhere. You know, it's like that. Whereas the other teaching says that, no, we can pick and choose. And then, you know, now, from now on, we're going to call ourselves the large vehicle, the great vehicle. Now, there's a historical context to all that. There's actually a historical context to all that. So what we call Theravada Buddhism is almost unchanged. The teaching is almost unchanged from the day of the Buddha. And so everybody knows that Buddha was born about 2,500, 2,600 years ago, and he had many disciples. And the sutra would tell you that out of that, he has like 2,500 disciples that he consider, you know, his elite. Okay, it's actually 2,505.
Huh.
Because
interesting, 2,500 years ago too, or you know, right.
Yeah. Anyway, the 5 is because after he got enlightened under the Bodhi tree, he went and looked for his 5 bodyguards, and so there was 5. Then he eventually met someone. So also, actually, what's interesting is all of his students came from somewhere else. So he would be like this wanderer, you know, with the answer, and then he meets someone. Yes. He convinced someone else that you know, his path is the right path. And then that person that he convinced turned out to be a guru. And so he is so convinced of his teaching, that Buddha's teaching, that not only did he came over, he brought all of his students to come over. And so you can actually dissect that. And so like after the 5, he get another 100. Then he got another. He met 3 brothers, and together, you know, it was like 2,000. You know, like there's a history of how that worked. And so finally he got like, and so we just shortened it to 2,500 students. These are their unique, you know, elites. Okay.
It's interesting you call them bodyguards. I've always heard them as the people he practiced asceticism with.
Well, both are true. Both are true. So what happened is that he one night he decided that after his son was born, actually, his son later on became his disciple.
Yes, Rahula.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So after his son was born, he decided it was time for him to renunciate. Okay.
Wait, so, Rahula, the name itself is interesting, the meaning, but we won't go into that. I guess.
Yeah, write that down. Okay. So he decided that he would renunciate, and so he left his household. And when he left his household, his king was trying to find him, and you know, finally he convinced his father that he's not coming back, and so his father sent 5 bodyguards to follow him, to protect him. And so those 5 then eventually practiced asceticism with him.
I didn't.
Okay?
I don't know how I missed that before.
And then later on he decided that he needs, and ultimately he needs the middle path. You know, the the living the life of the prince is one side, and then living the life of ascetic is another. And then he decided,
Don't forget he trained under two teachers that taught him the kind of the jhanic states too.
Yeah,
and he wanted to teach them first, but they were already dead after his enlightenment, right?
Yeah,
and then
correct.
There's that one person on the road that he kind of met and freaked out after his enlightenment too. So
yeah. So there's a whole history. So the 5 students, I call them bodyguards, because that's the story. But anyway, he had all these students, and they ultimately are the elders. Okay, they're the elders, and so when he passed away, when he achieved nirvana, so then all the students throw up their hands and say, oh,
Paranirvana, yeah,
and so then his oldest student decided that his oldest student says, no, wait a minute, this is not right. We gotta sit down and have a powwow. And so this is the word is the gathering, okay, and so we call that the council. And so to understand the history, of Buddhism, you have to start with, quote, council. So the first council was held either 30 or 90 days after the death of Buddha, because they have for 2 reasons. One is that it's still a rainy season, and they have to call everybody back. Because what happened is that once the student become learned, then Buddha would send them away. Okay, so when the news of Buddha's death got to their ears, they all come back. So they have to wait for everyone to come back. Okay, and then they also have to wait for the end of the rain season. Okay, and so anyway, so the first council was essentially 30 or 90 days after Buddha's death, and 500 of the elders got together, and there's actually they got together, and they decided that what they do is very simple. They said and they only do two things. One is, what was Buddha's teaching? Okay, and then the other one is that, what are the rules?
Hīnayāna, yes.
Yeah, what are the rules? And so the primary purpose was for the rules. The primary purpose wasn't even for the teaching.
That's right. There's lots of controversy of what the rules should be then, right?
Yeah, so they formulate the rules. And so there's like 200 precepts for a male monastics, and there's whatever number for the female monastics.
It's
and
more though, yes.
Yeah. And so they actually spent the most time to say, these are the rules, these are the precepts that we have to follow. Yeah, the official rules. Then they got around to say, okay, now we're gonna have to focus on master's teaching. And so now keep in mind that everything was oral. This is 2,600 years ago. There were no written language. The first written sutta wasn't until like 800 years after, maybe 600 years after Buddha's death. Okay, so this is all oral. Now, someone would say, well, if it's oral, how could it be accurate? And actually, some historians, some people who actually believe that oral is more accurate than written.
Yes, and the whole teachings were designed lyrically and with repetitions just for that very purpose of memorizing.
Yeah.
And then you've got, this famous story of Ananda, the Buddha, who just had to be enlightened before he joined the first council.
Correct. And he was the one. He was the attendant. So he was, and he was, interestingly, he was born on the day that Buddha achieved enlightenment.
Wow! And
he was Buddha's cousin.
And attendant. Yep.
Yeah, and then he became his attendant because he has his photographic memory.
Yes.
And he actually, the story was that he made a pact with Buddha and says, I have to be present in every lecture you give, and if I'm not, then you have to come back and tell me that again so I could record it. Okay, so that's why our YouTube channel is called Thus I Record. Okay, Thus I Record. Thus I Record. Except that
the thing that struck me with the story with Ananda, though, that's so meaningful and this type of material is something like he once said to the Buddha, I I bet, spiritual friendship is, maybe half of the path in the Buddha said. Well, don't say that, Ananda. Spiritual friendship is the entirety of the path. It's something. It's a little paraphrase there.
Yeah. There's a lot of really great stories.
And that really struck me how important the importance they put on spiritual friendship.
Yeah,
it's just as important as having a good teacher. So
yeah. So this is called the first council, and we're probably can we get to the second council before time runs out on us today. But it's important to understand that the purpose of the council was, number one, to formulate and institutionalize the rules, the conduct. Okay.
And now this can tie, early councils can tie into the early schools of Buddhism too, and how most of them aren't around anymore. But I mean, that could be another topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is the first council, and so let me continue with the first council. So it was about the rules, it was about the precepts, and then secondary to that is that it was about Buddha's teaching, and the way it was done was that Ananda would recite Buddha's teaching.
The sutta part,
the sutta part. Yeah, he would recite Sutta's teaching, and that's the difference. By the way, that's the difference between Dhamma and Sutta. So Dhamma has different meanings, and one of that is what Buddha says is Dhamma, and what's written down and agreed on is the Sutta. Okay, so you can argue that one is the other, but the other doesn't have to be
very
that.
Good distinction, yes.
Yeah, so it's very important. So suttas are what not only what Ananda recite, but what everybody agree on. So the rules are very specific. Is that Ananda would recite, and then other people would say, "I didn't hear that," and then they would say, "Oh, then that doesn't belong there." Okay, it had to be unanimous. It cannot be like 499 of them says they heard it, but then one guy said, "No, I didn't hear it." Very strange.
And it's there's a lot of credibility because they are all fully enlightened beings. They're not fully enlightened, but they're all arhats. That's at present. Yeah. And then also, but who Ananda didn't do the Vinaya. I forget the guy that.
We can look that up. There's a name. Yeah, another very important.
Vinaya.
So out of the 500, there's you can list the names of the 10 most important disciples, and he's actually one of them. Yeah, he's actually very, very. He's the. So then that's how it's written down. I mean, not written down. That's how it's agreed on, and then it just became a oral tradition. It became an oral tradition, right?
Well, it continued. It solidified and continued the oral tradition.
And for the most part, one would
argue
that... Because
they were reciting some of his teachings before this,
so one would argue that the practice of the Theravada practice of today is not that different from what was agreed on 2,600 years ago.
Yes, there's an unbroken line.
There's an unbroken line. There's an unbroken line, and that,
as far as we can determine, yes. Yep.
Yeah, in fact, there's an interesting side note. In Thai, they don't have female monastics.
Huh.
Okay. Now in Mahayana, of course we have female monastics, but in Thailand they don't. And the argument that they make is that the male monastics has an unbroken chain all the way back to Buddha, whereas the female one was broken because out of the 500 elders, there were no female.
That's right. Yes.
And so they make the argument that it was broken, so therefore we cannot have female monastics in Thailand.
This is another. Speaking of controversial stuff, this is another one. I think Bhikkhu and Nalio, there's monastics on both sides of this, this issue, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. So, but you do see female monastics in Thailand, and they're called the white cloth. They actually they renunciate in Myanmar or Sri Lanka. So in Myanmar they actually relax. Okay.
Yes.
And so, but once they get back into, in fact, there was a controversy when the last king of Thai passed away. They refused attendance from the quote female monastics because they said that they're not real.
Huh. Yeah,
That was a huge controversy.
the white gown thing, at least in Thai forest tradition that I've heard out of a Abhayagiri podcast, is I think they have like an anagarika, which I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure. I think that means that's the first step before you become a novice. I'm not sure exactly. I have to look that up, but I remember the name anagarika. I have to look that up. But anyway,
Right.
yeah, that's another. There's so much to what you just brought up about the female monastic
Yeah.
thing.
So I will quickly. So that's the first council. That's the beginning of the Theravada teaching. One will argue that it's more or less unchanged and it was unbroken. Okay. And then so you mentioned a little bit about all the councils subsequent to that, which is then the start of the breaking off of the different sects. So today we're just going to talk about the second one. The second one actually was only about 300 years, something like that, after the death of Buddha. So this is still 300 years before the before Christ. Okay, so this is called the second council. So you imagine 300 years, how much, like this country is a little bit over 300 years, and how much has has been different, right, from the day that it was found. So you can imagine what 300 years mean, and what Buddhism, how Buddhism has changed. And so the history was that there was a huge argument. There was a huge argument between two separate sects. So, which is the beginning now of the Mahayana versus the large vehicle versus a small vehicle. Okay.
And was there a core to that argument?
Yes.
Core points. Okay.
Yeah. So there was a huge argument, and the argument was that there was a group of practitioners from one part of the country, and there was another group of practitioners in another part of the country, and then finally they had a disagreement, and you can look this up, but it's called the 10 points of dissension.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, 10 points is things like you're not supposed to have meal after noon.
That's right, and one was on salt. I remember some of these now.
I'm impressed that you know that. I am so impressed that you know
the
that.
gold and silver thing too, wasn't it? Yeah.
So I'll talk about the one that is more obvious,
Yes,
but actually less important in the moment, because things like how does it work? Like what does noon mean? Or can you have like if I come to St. Louis and I have a meal before noon, and then I hop onto a flight, and then somewhere else, can I have it again, right? Things like that. And so they come up with like either the 2 or the 3 finger rule, okay, which is that you get a stick. If the sun is on top, it casts a shadow, and it cannot be longer than 2 fingers.
Huh.
Okay, so there's another rule.
They use that to determine east too, the shadow with sticks and
stuff.
Yeah.
So there's another rule, which is when you sit someplace, how big is that space that you're supposed to sit? So that comes with that. Now the tradition of whenever a monastic sits down, he has to have a piece of cloth, and he sits on that.
So they have to have a certain amount of space, or not?
They have to have a certain amount of space.
And that's for what their like energy field, or
I have no idea.
Or?
I have no idea. I'm just telling you the data, okay? Exactly. I have no idea. Things like now actually the most important one that prompted everything was about money.
Yep.
And so in the traditional teaching of Buddha is that they have to renunciate, which means that there's a very, very, like rule that says that you cannot touch money. In fact, before you become a monk, you have to be like that novice monk, and the novice monk has 10 precepts. I actually took that precept because there's a way that you could do that for a week. And so I actually was a novice monk for a week. And out of that, the very last one is that you can't touch money.
Well, and then you can't also be in debt either, right? Some of the
nothing. You're supposed to.
Before you even join, you can't, because some people were doing that to get out of debt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that all back in those days, all the people who have the resources to pursue the spiritual path are very rich people. And so 99.9% of Buddhist students come from very rich family. Remember the story about how someone wanted to borrow or buy a piece of land, and he went to the prince, and then eventually the prince says, "Well, I don't need money." And then he says, "But if you can cover it with gold, you can as much as you can, that's yours, right?" I mean, look at how much money these guys have.
But it's the opposite kind of in more modern times, where people would get so much in debt, and people would be coming after them for that debt, and then they would escape under the protection of a monastery. But not allowed
but that come later. That come later. That come later. So the initial idea of renunciation is that they're dealing. Buddha is dealing with students who are of huge, amazing wealth, and so he has to kind of say, well, you have to give up your wealth, and so they actually get. So the word bhikkhu, bhikkhu means beggar.
Yeah, a mendicant. Yes.
Yeah, it means beggar. Now, what's interesting is that if you were a beggar, and you go to Buddha and you want to be his disciple, he will not accept you. Interesting dichotomy, because if you're a beggar and you just say, "I want to study Buddhism, I want to be a householder," and Buddha would say, "Well, no, you can't be a householder without taking responsibility, for yourself. You can't be, no, sorry." Whereas if you are a rich person, he turned you into a beggar.
Wow, it's equal the playing field there. That's
crazy.
Over my radar.
Yeah. So the point is that rule was put in so all his students have to renounce. Okay. Now what happened is that because there's a way to get around that, because they have attendants. And so the attendants would be the one to actually collect money. So for example, when I travel with Master, one time we were put in this place, really beautiful, essentially a villa. We live in this place, and where one part is the living quarter, and the other part is the Dharma hall. And so after we finished the practice, it was like 7 days, something like that. The student lived in someplace else, and so we went back. And Master, they put him in his suite. There's this hallway, and I made a mistake of standing by the hallway, just having a conversation, and all of a sudden I see in front of me all the students who were lining up. And I said, "What's going on?" And so what they thought that I was their attendant, and my job was to accept the money.
Wow.
And I said, no, that's not Master's style. You want to give him money, give him money. So anyway, back to the second council. The whole point of the second council was that there was a disagreement, because one group were very, very true to the original teaching, which is that they don't touch money. Okay. The second group says, well, no, that's not right. Money is money. Money has no, it's not even. So what they do is that they set up this bowl, this pot, this pan with water and some turtle or something, for people to throw money in there. And then they said, we didn't accept money,
The turtles,
The turtles did, right? And then they took the money at the end. So this was a huge problem. So they had this second council just to kind of having this powwow. But out of that, they come up with the rule for the 10 point. And essentially it says that, look, the Theravada would agree to this 10 points. You don't agree, you're not one of us. Okay?
Okay.
But top of the list had to do with salt.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Yeah, it's just it's how much times have changed and stuff.
But do you know why?
No, tell me. Yes, please.
So the point is that monastics are not supposed to carry salt.
Because you're not supposed to store food overnight too. It wasn't because salt was precious. It was because what happened is that the rule, because they're beggars. Okay, so they essentially eat 2 meals a day, breakfast, which is whatever, fruits and whatever, and then the main meal is at lunch. So they would actually go out and they do the arm round, right? They would get the offering, and the rule was that, first of all, they have to pick a random direction.
They can't go back to the same place every time.
Yeah, yes.
Has to be random.
Get dependent on that, yeah.
Second rule is that they can only knock on 5 houses.
Huh.
And they knock, but they cannot go in. And then it's up to the inhabitants to give them food or not.
Well, sometimes they're on the road, though, right?
Well, nowadays, yeah.
Nowadays, okay. But
Yeah.
this is also real 2 quick points. This overall, though, this is between like the spirit of Buddhist teaching and then the letter of it, right? Because there's stories in the suttas where, such and such did this, so then a new rule was established because of what happened, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's all about, do we want to stick, how do we stick to the letter?
Yeah.
When are the advantages of doing that? And when
Right.
is, what is really in the true spirit,
Correct,
And then
correct,
also one of the...
But having that conversation means that you're not a Theravada.
That's right. Yep, because they're strict. Then
Yeah.
there's the thing about preserving lineages.
Well, again, let's go back to-
and also
yeah.
picking and choosing which works.
No, but
So I see
that's a
advantages
difference
to
between
both.
a difference between data and fact.
Yeah.
Because just compare side by side. The Theravada, the way it was practiced in Southeast Asia, they're very strict on money. But they're not strict on vegetarian.
Yeah. It's very fascinating.
They just is
And
that
then-
Buddha never taught us to be vegetarian. Because how can you be vegetarian when
Exactly.
you rely on someone else's for food?
Well, you would insult somebody, right? If you
Yeah,
didn't accept their,
yeah.
unless there is one exception though. If you knew that the animal was slaughtered just for you, killed just for you,
Right. So they come up with 5 rules that they can't slaughter just for you. That's why the random direction becomes important. They cannot be waiting for you.
Oh, I see. That's a good point. Yeah.
Right.
And then with the
They cannot
precept,
slaughter
though-
for you. You cannot be present when the meat was slaughtered, even if they don't do it for you. You cannot be within earshot. Okay. And then there's 2 more, which is that if they are roadkill, you can eat it.
Okay.
Or if the animals were fighting
And would die.
and they're
Huh,
done, you can go
Yeah.
get the scrap. That's okay.
Well, that
Yeah.
because that's nature, right? Yeah.
That's nature. It's basically
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
But my point is that this is the difference between data and fact, because
Yes.
one side holds it as fact. It says no, we can't touch money, but we're quite flexible when it comes to eating meat. The other side, the Chinese Buddhism, no, you cannot eat meat. There's no way to get around that. Okay, but we can touch money. That's so-
with the money, what about crypto coming up? Are you going to touch a computer that's been involved in a crypto transaction or is holding crypto on a hard drive?
Yeah, but
that,
like you
it
were
gets really
saying,
gray.
none
Yeah.
of that lends itself to anything.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
The other thing,
So the salt has to do with this. The salt has to do with this. So 5 houses, and it doesn't matter if you get offering or not. It's only 5 houses. So worst case scenario, if you went to 5 houses, you have nothing to eat. Well, too bad.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't go to another 5. And if you then the opposite is what if you go to 1 house and you get all the food that you need? No, you still have to visit 4 more.
So they want an interaction with the community, so they
Yeah.
weren't completely.
It's a
separate.
2-way street. It's a 2-way street.
Yeah.
It's for your own, because it's actually the 2 parami. Actually, if you think about it, one was the renunciation parami, and the other one was generosity parami.
Yes.
Right? It's the 2. Now, then the problem comes. Well, I got lucky today. Got lots of
Yeah.
food. I didn't
Yeah.
violate the rule. I stayed within 5 houses, but I do have a lot of food. I can't eat it all. And tomorrow I might not get any. In fact, yesterday I didn't get any. Couldn't I just preserve it? And the rule says no. And to make sure that you cannot preserve, you cannot carry salt.
Yeah.
Crazy. Huh?
Well, yeah. What are you going to do? You're going to eat 5 bowls of food?
Oh man, my refrigerator is broken, so I'm gonna have to eat 5 bowls of fruit. I need some
Well,
time for that.
Good thing you have some salt, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we call it? We continue
Sure.
then. Yeah. That's great. That's great.
All right, Denny.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions. Thank you.
Well, yeah, it was a pleasure, and I don't think
So
we got
next
to
time,
everything.
end of November, we'll pick a time. We'll continue with the historical development of the different sects, starting again with Theravada. We finish that. Then we come back to the Chinese Buddhism, the Mahayana. Then maybe that we branch off into the Japanese Zen Buddhism, how that got branch off, from that.
And we didn't even touch the Tibetan stuff, really.
And then we got to come back to the Tibetan.
Yeah, yeah.
We got to come back to the Tibetan, and then finally, when we're done, we'll go on to the next thing.
Plus all the other potential topics we raised today. So
there's lots more. There's a lot more. There's a lot more. Okay, one public announcement. If everything goes well, our Saturday class, our English Saturday class, which is 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. I know in the past Josh has talked about that. I hesitate to give you more information because I knew we were in transition. But in any case, we are using Zoom. Everybody knows Zoom by now. Zoom just started with a platform called On Zoom, which allows us to really open up our Saturday morning class to public, and ultimately allowing us to receive donation for MAPA and Master Jiru or for whatever other purpose that we want to do. So it's a great way of really reaching out. So I'm hoping to get it all done so we can launch this Saturday. If not, it will be launched the week after. And the URL for that is Denny K Miu, DENNYKMIU.com/fellowship. Okay, that is not active today. That only points to our YouTube playlist. But hopefully once you get going, it will point to the On Zoom page where you can buy tickets. It's free, and it will give you all the information to log in and all the good stuff. Okay?
So Denny, you're gonna transition the current URL you're using now to that one, then?
No, the current URL would work the rest of the time. It won't work on Saturday.
Just Saturday.
The one that we call DennyK.com/Zoom, that won't work. Okay, because they will send you a unique URL. Okay.
So use the /fellowship on Saturday. And
/fellowship. That would be the Saturday. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks,
Thank you.